So I'm going to pick up from where we left off in the last video with developing this logic model for Essex County's gun buyback program. We put in an intervening variable, which is this variable here, the number of guns. The idea is the program reduces the number of guns, and the number of guns is associated with gun violence. More gun violence, less guns, less gun violence. So this is a positive relationship. This is a negative relationship. I mentioned this in the previous video, but just to reiterate, if the original XY relationship between the program and the outcome is negative, then it should be true, if your model is logically consistent, that any of the pathways from the program to the outcome should also be negative when you multiply the segments of the path. Okay, so if I multiply a negative by a positive, it's a negative, right? So that reproduces the original negative relationship between X and Y. So regardless of how complicated that path is, if you multiply along the causal pathway, multiply the plus and minus signs along the causal pathway, you should get to the original sign of the relationship between X and Y. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to just add a few more intervening variables to show that the logic model can get more interesting than this. So here, let me begin by thinking about how the program leads to the number of guns being reduced in the community. So here, let me relabel this a bit. Important point: labeling these variables is very important. If the label is too vague, sometimes you can confuse yourself or confuse your audience with what it is that the variable actually represents. So this is also the buyback program is related to fewer guns in the community, and then the number of guns in the community is associated with gun violence. Okay, so how does it reduce the number of guns in the community? So in other words, we can kind of back up. I think this link here between the number of guns in the community and gun violence, I think, is fairly self-evident. Fewer guns in the community, fewer guns in the hands of people who are either using them against other people or against themselves. We could, I suppose, elaborate this link, but I think it's more interesting to go backwards and think, well, how does the program reduce the number of guns in the community? Well, a simple answer to that is it collects guns, but maybe that's a little. Well, maybe it's worth putting in. Let me just do that for sake of illustration. So I'm just going to copy this variable just to create a new variable. Let me put that back here, okay, and label it number of guns collected. Right? Okay. Now this may seem a little self-evident, but it's sometimes it's interesting to diagram all the steps, right? Okay. Again, I'm going to use this formatting trick to get this line. Okay, so this, by the way, this negative sign goes with that relationship. I'm going to put in yet again another arrow. Every time you put in a variable, you really need two arrows to connect it. Again, I'm going to copy the formatting. Okay, so here. Okay, so having the program. Now this is also going to be a positive relationship. I'm going to copy this and put it here. Oops, doesn't really. So this is a positive relationship. Having the program equals more guns collected. More guns collected equals less guns in the community. So this relationship here, I'm going to borrow this. Just copy this. I'm sorry. Just going to copy this. this relationship is negative. Okay, so you can kind of see a pattern here. If you have we had an original relationship here, and we diagram that. We put an intervening variable to represent that relationship. In a sense, once you've done that, you can kind of take this original relationship out, because in a way, having both the what's called the direct relationship and the indirect relationship together in a path diagram may be misleading. In a sense, if you've done a good job of articulating the intervening variables, then you shouldn't have a direct relationship left over. Although that, it depends. But generally, so here we're kind of doing the same thing a step back. We took this original relationship between the program and the number of guns in the community, and we're representing that by an intervening variable. So we can kind of take that arrow out. This kind of logic is, or this kind of process of articulating the steps and then removing the longer leaps, as it were, is a good way to kind of think about how to develop one of these logic models. So I'm going to move these variables around a bit again. Okay. I don't know if I can move this. I'm trying to think. Yeah. Oh, that works. Okay. All right. So. Okay. So the program increases the number of guns collected, right? With more guns collected, you have fewer guns in the community. More guns in the community means more gun violence. So that certainly is a little bit more precise in terms of how the program works, right? Let me just throw in one more intervening variable just to illustrate something a little bit more, a little bit different. So I'm gonna copy this variable. What I have in mind is the idea that people have to be aware of the program and motivated to participate. These are slightly different things, but let me just call it awareness / motivation. Doesn't quite fit, so I think I'm just going to have to stretch this out a little bit. There, okay. So in other words, the program has to make people aware that there is a gun buyback program. People just don't automatically know there is one, right? And so there needs to be a public relations campaign, a social marketing campaign, advertising, endorsements, political announcements to build awareness of the program. And also the program has to have features to it that motivate people to participate. So there's a cash incentive that people get paid money if they turn in their guns. There's also maybe a social motivation in the sense of some message being communicated that it's important to get guns out of the home, get guns off the street, to make everybody safer, make you safer, make your neighbor safer, that sort of thing. So there's both sort of cash motivation, money motivation, but also maybe social motivation that's a part of the program. I'm sure this program has a advertising, public relations element to it. So it's that I want to try to include in here. And so let me just make some room for this to happen. I'm going to move the program back a bit. Okay, so again, I'm going to need some additional arrows here. Now this is not I'm not articulating a link that's already there necessarily. Although maybe I am. But let me just draw this out. I'll add an arrow here. Let's say going from the program to awareness, right? And again, copy the format. And then another arrow from the awareness to the number of guns collected, right? Because here again, here's the idea, right? Okay, so let me just again kind of move these things around a bit. I said I can resituate this arrow. Huh? Yeah, let me put that over here. Yeah, okay. So let's think about that. The program increases awareness and motivation, hopefully, if they've done a good job announcing it and marketing it. So let me So more the program builds awareness and motivation, right? The more awareness and more motivation, the more guns collected, right? So that's going to be another positive relationship. More guns collected. I got to move this arrow over here. This sign. More guns collected. The arrow. I haven't figured out a way to link the plus and minus signs to the arrows. I'm not sure that can be done, but okay. So here's a slightly more elaborate logic model. So here the program it may collect guns kind of independently, but it also builds awareness and motivation, right? By advertising. When people are aware and motivated, they are more likely to turn in their guns again. And then we're back to the relationships we talked about before. More guns collected, fewer guns in the community. More guns in the community, more crime, or more gun violence. And so the question comes up, sort of how many variables are useful in a logic model. As you can see here, I started out with just the very basic model, the program and the outcome. I added one intervening variable, and then I elaborated that a bit more and added a couple more intervening variables. And I think when it gets to the point of 4 or 5 variables, I think then you tend to have more of an interesting and useful logic model. So that may be sort of a minimum in a sense. I think just one intervening variable is usually not sufficient unless the program is just super simple. On the other hand, you don't want so many variables that it becomes confusing, and you don't want sort of obvious things included in the logic model. So one way to think about it is if the link between two variables is fairly self-evident, then maybe it doesn't need an intervening variable. If the link between the variables is a little less self-evident, then maybe an intervening variable is needed. So let's see, number of guns in the community, gun violence. So is that link maybe fairly self-evident, and we don't need to elaborate it. Fewer guns available, fewer criminals with guns, less gun violence. On the other hand, if you're, there may be reasons to get more fine-grained than that, but that link may be sort of self-evident enough, at least for the purposes of this kind of exercise, that we could leave it alone. We saw here that the program leads to an increase in the number of guns collected, but that may beg sort of a question of how that happens. How does the program increase the number of guns? Now that again, you may think is self-evident. The program, you may have sort of assumptions about how the program works, but I think adding this awareness and motivation thing helps clarify that somewhat, and also suggests that, for example, if the program isn't leading to an increase, or if the program doesn't manage to collect many guns, why is that? Is it because maybe people don't know about it, or maybe they know about it but they don't feel safe turning in the gun? So it sort of suggests that there's some important intervening steps between the program's existence and the number of guns collected. And this link here, though, if you collect guns, the number of guns in the community, that relationship seems fairly direct and maybe doesn't need elaboration. So I guess what I'm saying is that the one way to figure out whether you have enough detail in the logic model is to look at your relationships. If the relationships seem fairly self-evident, then maybe you've sort of got enough detail. If the link between one variable and another variable seems a little bit widespread or a little bit unclear, then maybe you need an intervening variable. Okay, so